Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of the Sarasota Bay Deep Dives series, where we bring on people whose work has positive impacts on Sarasota Bay, its watershed, and the communities of people and wildlife who depend on a healthy bay. My name is Darcy Young. I work with the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program in Sarasota, Florida, where our mission is to restore and protect bays from Anna Maria Sound down to the Venice Inlet. My guest on this third episode of Sarasota Bay Deep Dives is Sheila Scolaro, who's the Science and Outreach Coordinator for Sarasota County. Sheila is a seagrass expert who has a really deep fascination with these beautiful seagrass habitats in our bays, and I'm really excited to hear what she's planning to share with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and loop her into the stream. Hey, Sheila.
I'm so excited to go on a deep dive into seagrass habitats with you today. But I'm a little fogged up, so I'm going to take these off.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Thank you for being so into the theme. So Sheila, I'm hoping we can start off just by you telling us what you do as the Science and Outreach Coordinator for Sarasota County Stormwater.
Sure. So I'll start out by giving a brief background on me. Again, my name is Sheila Scolaro. I am a rare and endangered species of Florida native. I was born and raised just off Anna Maria Island near Robinson's Preserve, so part of Sarasota Bay Estuary Program's area. I grew up snorkeling and fishing the seagrass flats of our estuaries. And from a really early age, I just became so amazed about the diversity of life hiding just below the surface of the water. When I was a senior in high school, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened. And that had a really big impact on my life. Here, this ecosystem, which I had grown to love so much, was in peril, and there was nothing I could do to protect it. So it was pretty much at that point that I decided to dedicate my career into protecting these estuary ecosystems. So I started my career at FWC, at their research institute. So I studied seagrass ecology basically all around the entire Gulf Coast of Florida. So I've seen almost the entire Gulf Coast of Florida from the boat, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing.
But I'm now at Sarasota County. I am the Science and Outreach Coordinator, as you said. So I manage several monitoring programs. I coordinate our water quality monitoring program, and then I'm the primary investigator on our seagrass monitoring program. And I have the exciting opportunity to be able to use that science and that information and my background in estuaries to be able to educate the community and engage with them about how they can protect water quality in our estuaries.
Cool. Thank you so much for that background, Sheila. Yeah, I think I love asking our guests, how did you get involved in this work? Because I think so many of us bring a real passion to it, and I know that you do for sure. So since we're here to talk today about seagrass habitats, maybe you can tell us just what are seagrasses? Are they, what are they?
Sure. So seagrasses are often mistaken with seaweeds. Seaweeds are actually algae. They can be rooted on the ground or just kind of tumbling along. Whereas seagrasses are actually rooted marine plants. They were originally land plants that migrated back into the water about 100 million years ago. So they retain a lot of those same characteristics of land plants that we see outside today. So they photosynthesize, so they need light in order to grow and reproduce. And then they also reproduce underwater, which is pretty cool. So in Sarasota County, we have about 6,000 acres of habitat, of seagrass habitat in the Bay Area. So if you want to pull up the screen.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. You shared some really good maps with me. So do you want to start here?
Sure, yeah. This is a map of the seagrass habitats in the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program's region. This is maps that were produced by the Southwest Florida Water Management District in 2018. So this is pretty relevant data. And then the bottom left corner is just a picture of a seagrass habitat that was taken in Tampa Bay. So just for people, if they aren't really familiar with what it's like to be underwater and snorkeling along a seagrass habitat, that just gives you an idea of what I'm talking about here today.
So it kind of looks like a lawn, a little bit underwater.
Yeah, a little bit. It's pretty cool.
Like an overgrown lawn. So great. So these dark green areas, that's showing us where we have really continuous beds of seagrass, right?
Correct. And then the lighter areas are locations where it's more sparse, which is still really important, but it gives us an idea of how seagrass habitats are changing over time. There are about 72 different species of seagrass around the world, but in our area, we only have about 3 species. So if you want to just show a picture of those 3 species.
Sure.
So the one on the left, people who wade fish a lot probably are familiar with this one. This is Caliduli rhodii, and it's shoal grass. So it's thin and really flat, and it grows in really shallow areas. And we consider this species a pioneer species. So it's the first one to come in after a major disturbance has happened. And then the next species to the right is manatee grass. And why do you think we call it manatee grass, Darcy?
I always call it manatee grass because it's roly-poly. But I know the real reason. Manatees love eating it.
Yeah, exactly. And just interesting fact, it has a really high sugar content. So if you break the seagrass blade in half, you can actually smell the sweetness, which is kind of interesting. So that's probably why manatees like it so much. But it's really round, cylindrical, very similar to like a piece of spaghetti. And then the last species on the right, which is my personal favorite, and I'm totally biased because I did all my master's research on it. This is turtle grass. So this is the main source of food for green turtles. And it's considered the species with the highest habitat value. So they often form really dense beds. And so it makes really good hiding places for animals. And one really cool thing about this species, just to go on a little rabbit hole, it actually does reproduce underwater. So if you want to go to the next.
Yeah, let's do that.
So yeah, so this shows some of turtle grass's sexual reproduction. So as I mentioned earlier, it is a plant and it reproduces sexually underwater. So turtle grass is what we call dioecious, meaning that it has separate male and female flowers. So the top right picture, the little green spindly thing, that is a female flower. And it's about the size of a quarter, so you can see it visibly if you're snorkeling around. I don't know how many people are like me and have their face shoved into a seagrass bed, but it's pretty cool if you do. The bottom right corner and then the middle picture display a male turtle grass flower. And then the one on the left is a seed.
Those are so cute. And you actually just answered a question that we just got from Bryce and Coco, who are watching live. So they wanted to know what the seeds look like of turtle grass. So you can see those there on the left, right, Sheila?
Yes. So if you ever find those, and you'll find them sometimes on in the rack line or on the edge of beaches or at low tide. So if you ever see one of these, just give it a little chuck back into the water. We need all the little seedlings that we can use.
That's right. Yeah, those are so cool. I think maybe in the past I've mistaken them for black mangrove seedlings because they have that similar sort of lima bean shape.
Yeah.
So we've got another question here, which is when do they bloom?
Oh, great question. They're actually blooming right now. Around April and May is usually when they have their most productive flowering. And then you start seeing fruits forming in about June, and then you should see the little seedlings in about July or August. So they're really dependent on the temperature of the water. So right now the water is really warm, so we're expecting to see them fruiting and flowering a little bit earlier.
Got it. Similar to some of the plants in my yard right now. Some of my native plants are in beautiful bloom right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Sheila, this has been a really awesome introduction to the biology of seagrass. Giving us a closer look at these plants that are living mostly unseen underwater in our bays. And I'm wondering, why are seagrasses important for a healthy Sarasota Bay?
Sure. Seagrasses are extremely important, and they provide a ton of what we call ecosystem services. Or basically any benefits that we receive from a properly functioning, healthy ecosystem. So basically, ecosystem services puts a monetary value on the natural world. So some of the ecosystem services that we receive from seagrass habitats include stabilizing sediments and reducing erosion, which is really important when we just purchase a house on the water for $1 million. And then they also can improve water quality. So their long blades will actually filter out some of the metals and contaminants in the water. And one of the most important things, they provide habitat and food for the most important and iconic species in our area. 70% of the fish species in Sarasota Bay rely on seagrass habitats at some point in their life. So even if you fish offshore, your juvenile groupers started their life and grew up in seagrass habitats. Snook also grew up and lived full-time in the seagrass beds, as well as manatees, which eat it, turtles.
You shared some pretty good wildlife in seagrass pictures that I want to show our audience here too. Can bring a few of those up.
Sure. So these are all pictures that I've taken on my adventures in the seagrass bed. Most of them were taken in Tampa Bay because, as I said before, that's where I've conducted most of my master's research. But the dolphin was in the Keys, and the scallop was in the Big Bend area near Homosassa. But exploring the seagrass beds is so exciting because you never know what you're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember the first time that I did that in Sarasota Bay. I was totally blown away by what was in there. So we've got another question about some of the ecosystem services of seagrass here, which is the seagrass produce breathable oxygen. So that oxygen that seagrass produces when it photosynthesizes underwater, does that actually contribute to the oxygen that we're breathing here on land?
Really good question, Scobro. Seagrasses don't really provide oxygen to us. However, the oxygen that they produce is really important for oxygenating the water column. So while a lot of organisms breathe underwater, they still need that oxygen. So without seagrasses, then you're likely not going to have any oxygen available for snook or other organisms.
Great. So Sheila, you talked about why seagrass is important for water quality, right? But water quality is also important for seagrass, right? Can you talk about kind of the reverse, why we need good water quality in order to have healthy seagrass beds?
Yeah, so they do, as I mentioned, provide all of these wonderful services to us. However, as I mentioned before, they are plants, so they need a lot of light in order to grow and reproduce. When we are altering our watersheds and start introducing nutrients into the water column, that nutrients acts as fertilizer for algae to grow. That algae then blocks light from reaching the seagrasses, and those seagrasses then suffer. So seagrasses, because of their sensitivity, are considered indicators of water quality.
Great. So you know that if we went back to that map, that we had up earlier, you can see that we have a lot of seagrass in our bays, and where you start seeing it growing into those deeper areas, you can tell that's where you have some more of that light penetration getting down further, right? Because that light is what's limiting the growth of those seagrass beds.
Exactly. Yeah. So by monitoring it, it helps us get an idea of how well we're managing our nutrients coming off the watershed. It also lets us prioritize certain locations that might need some more effort or some more resources. So this data is really valuable for the county and for everyone in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, it's a really important indicator of where we are with the health of our bays. And Karen has a question: if algae grows on seagrass or if it just kind of floats around in the water?
So algae does both. There are different types of algae. So we have a rooted algae, which is not technically rooted. They have little holdfasts, which secure themselves to the ground. And then we also have drift algae, which is kind of like a big tumbleweed and just rolls along. Oftentimes you see that on the beach. But then we also have some types of algae that grow on the seagrass, and those are called epiphytic algae. So that can help us identify how much nutrients are in the water based on how much algae is growing on the grass blade.
So that word epiphytic, right? Floridians should be pretty familiar with that one because we have so many terrestrial epiphytic plants like orchids and certain kinds of bromeliads that live in our trees and make them look fuzzy, right? It's a similar thing that's going on with epiphytes on seagrass.
Exactly. And if you have too much moss growing on a tree, then it's going to limit that light from reaching those blades or those leaves. And it's the same way with seagrasses. If you have too much of that epiphytic growth, then it can block light from reaching the seagrass blade surface and can actually hurt the seagrass themselves.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is also interesting. And we've got another question. All these questions are really great. This question is going back to the oxygen. We're wondering if seagrasses produce more oxygen than they use, because, like all organisms, they need to respire. But are they producing more oxygen than they're using themselves?
Usually, yes, but it really depends on the water quality in an area. So what limits how much oxygen they're producing is the amount of light availability. But their respiration rates are likely not going to change at night. So if the water is really cloudy, there's algae in the water, then they aren't producing enough oxygen that they will need to use later at night.
Gotcha. So Sheila, getting back to that water quality aspect, can we go through a few of the things we can do in our homes and yards to help promote water quality that will help those seagrass meadows flourish in our bays?
Oh, definitely. One of them is reducing our fertilizer use. For those of you who aren't unaware, we have a fertilizer ban from June 1st to September 30th. So we can't use any fertilizer on our lawns during that period of time. And the reason for that is because it rains so much that the fertilizer that we put on our lawns doesn't have enough time to be taken up by the plant or by the lawn, and instead it's just washed down into the bay. So please don't use fertilizer during the summer rainy months. Another really great thing that you can do is to pick up your pet waste. I know a lot of people don't think that it's really that big of a deal, but pets, their waste has a lot of nutrients as well as viruses and bacteria. So every time you don't pick up after your pet, that gets washed into the bay. And with over 50,000 dogs in Sarasota County, that really can make up a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of dog too.
Yeah.
Those are two really great things to keep in mind to keep our seagrasses healthy. And Christine is wondering, just what's your favorite fun fact about seagrass?
Ooh, okay. Thanks, Christine. So my favorite fun fact, and it's might be a little bit lengthy, but so seagrasses reproduce underwater, right? They the males release pollen at night, and that pollen can float through the water column to the female flower. It's called hydrophily. But about 7 years ago, a researcher actually put a GoPro in the seagrass bed at night and captured a polychaete, or a marine worm, visiting the male plant and depositing a piece of pollen on its back, and then visiting the female plant and dropping off that pollen and helping to fertilize the seagrass flowers. So they're like little bees of the sea, and I thought that was absolutely insane.
Yeah, that video was so cool. Yeah, we keep talking about how they're, land plants that went back underwater, and they have some of these similar characteristics to our land plants, but it was still crazy to see that, active pollination happening underwater, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So Sheila, you've been really generous with your time and with your knowledge and your passion for seagrasses. Is there anything else you want to share with us about seagrass before I ask you your sign-off question?
Sure. Well, it's more about the estuaries in general. Estuaries are the beating heart of our local economy and our community's identity. And during this time of quarantine and self-isolation, I challenge each and every one of us to take a moment to sit back and reflect on how our daily actions are impacting the estuaries and the ecosystems around us. We're kind of past the time when we can point fingers at each other and blame each other for problems that we've all helped create. And instead, we need to join hands, figuratively, of course, but work together with governments, businesses, and of course the community in order to really protect these ecosystems. Unless we all work together, we're not really going to see a change. And if you're new to the area, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the interviewees who have been on this deep dive. We are all here to teach you about this beautiful place that we all live in. So,
yeah, thanks for that message, Sheila. I think that's so important, and it's why I love working with you. So collaborative. And speaking of this beautiful place we live in, I know I've been thinking more and more about the places around Sarasota Bay that I love so much, and looking forward to when I can go back. Do you have a favorite place around Sarasota Bay where you're really looking forward to getting back to?
I have a couple places. One is a restaurant. So the first is in Cortez. It's Swordfish Grill, my favorite place. If you've never been, highly recommend it. So that's the first place I will go. And then the second place I will go will be to explore Beer Can Island. I really miss that place. It's just amazing to see how islands change and shift over time. And so it's just a really magical place.
Awesome. Well, Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today, for telling us about seagrass and, again, sharing that passion that you have. And with that, I'm going to share our upcoming interview schedule for the rest of April. So thank you so much, Sheila.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. I hope to see you soon. And that is going to wrap up our third episode of Sarasota Bay Deep Dives. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, that was Sheila Scolaro, the Science and Outreach Coordinator for Sarasota County Stormwater. And we have Sheila's colleague, Molly Holland, is actually joining us next Tuesday. And she will be talking about neighborhood projects for clean water.